Alright, so this is Chris Campbell. He's going to be talking about some really cool power stuff. Power tools. Right?
PowerShell.
Oh, PowerShell. I'm sorry. Right.
Yep. All right, so I'm Chris, and this is No Tools, No Problem, building a PowerShell bot. These slides are already up at that link, and all the code that I reference is already up on GitHub.
Wait. Go back. This is what I missed like the other day.
My bad.
It's recorded.
I think I sent you a tweet with the links.
Slower.
All right.
It's recorded.
Are we good?
No.
Good?
I'll tweet it to you, Greg.
All right.
If nobody else does.
So everyone puts their credit slide at the end. There's a reason I put mine at the beginning. I would not be up here. I would not be in this community if it weren't for all of you guys and for everyone else in the community sharing at events like this. I specifically wanted to call out the PowerShell security community because it's so small and it should blossom. The PowerShell authors, the original guys that wrote PowerShell, it's awesome. Chris Gates for calling me out last year, saying negative stuff without putting up anything positive. So thanks to him, I've submitted to conferences. Joe, I've taken his class. He's been a great asset in the security community. People like him and that attitude are things that we need to cultivate and not talk against. My coworkers and people in this room that count the number of times I use the word PowerShell in a day, and the group that let me give this talk, the argument that created this talk, and that guy who was very argumentative, which I'll explain in a minute. So who am I? I'm a security researcher for Crucial, part of the Harris Corporation. I was an operator on the Army Red Team for 4 years, and I was an Army officer. I presented at Black Hat and a couple other conferences. Prior to that, I was a normal run-of-the-mill Windows admin. I was not very good at my job. I contribute to Matt Graber in the back there, his PowerSploit open source PowerShell offensive post-exploitation framework. I have a blog and I'm on Twitter. And I've years ago, someone described pen testers as we're just button pushing monkeys. You know, we're grabbing other people's tools, and I really identified with that and went ahead and took that. So I'm one of the original button pushing monkeys. Standard disclaimer. I probably don't know what I'm talking about. A lot of the stuff that's in this code violates terms of service. So if you were to actually go out and do it, that may or may not be illegal. I'm not a lawyer. And I'm not a developer, so there will be bugs. All right, so here's the discussion, the story. It was a high security environment, one very similar to what Chris and Joe were talking about a couple talks ago. They had everything. They whitelisted all binaries. They had an IPS. They had all the shiny boxes, and they had really good people. They were really smart. But they really got this this attitude of we're so good that no one can win against us. So they didn't care about their users. They didn't care about user awareness. They didn't care about phishing because no code that came in could ever get code execution in their environment because they had a big application whitelisting product that may or may not have recently been hacked. And because of that, they had a lot of confidence because to a pen tester, application whitelisting is a scary thing. So I went out on the internet looking for other examples of this attitude, and one just kind of came to me after a CCDC practice event. Someone was reading the write-up, and his comment on that was a very similar attitude. You know, when you're good at being a defender, there's no one that could beat you.
God, this was hysterical. That whole, yeah.
So I kind of talked him down from the ledge. I thought, you know, this is what we would have to do. This is what an attacker would have to do to get in. And he went down a different argument that without HD Moore releasing Metasploit, that none of that would have been possible. So you can't get in without using other people's tools. if you could, because I disagreed with him, he said, do it now. So I had the time.
Secure boxes without using other people's tools.
Right, exactly. So I had the time there with that organization. So I decided I would take, I originally thought I could do it in 30 minutes. It ended up being just over an hour. But I defined my own requirements, and I didn't accomplish all of these things. In that,
Oh, just over an hour. I'm sorry.
Well, you suck, bro.
Yeah.
It took you an hour to build your own tools out of PowerShell?
you're going to see it's about 8 lines of code. So I do suck, but this is the storyline that I sold them. That it would be client-side delivery, very similar to what Chris and Joe were talking about. I didn't have any infrastructure. I didn't have any servers out there that I could use or that I was willing to use for this. They were very keen, which is a great thing. They were keen on off-hours traffic. They're looking for beaconing. Anything that's talking when their people aren't there, they're a standard 9-to-5 shop. They have no traffic after that time. So we really had to make sure that we didn't generate any traffic. They also used both authenticating and not proxies, so we had to be proxy aware. Of course, we had to not flag AV, which was what the last talk was about. We also had to bypass this product, which fortunately Matt Graver and I, many years ago, ran against this product, and that's kind of the beginning of PowerSploit, when he was able to write invoke shellcode to get around it. So I already knew how we were going to do that. I also don't know of any PowerShell scripts, even really, really evil, very obviously evil, that flag any current AV products. I've not seen it yet. That could change, but PowerShell is pretty safe to use, and it's really easy, so I could write it on site. So this was the plan. They had Windows 7 as their main, all their workstations were Windows 7, Service Pack 1. You know, they were protected by standard defenses. They had proxies, firewalls, all that good stuff. So I was like, I don't have an infrastructure, so I'm going to use Twitter and Pastebin, 2 sites that I knew that their people could get to. That's not always the case. I was going to register all the accounts and only hit those sites through Tor, and I'd use Google to find stuff that I put up on Pastebin.
I have a question.
Yep.
So you are going to do like kind of like an asynchronous kind of, they're putting data on Google and you're relying on, or they're putting data on Pastebin and you're relying on Google to find it?
Yes.
That's badass.
So there is no direct connection between me and them. This is an asynchronous
Right,
C2.
yeah, so that's, yeah.
Right. So this you could change this and make it direct. You could host a website, put all the code that you want pulled down, and then have them exfil over posts back to you. Really, the end result of this is something that can be molded. What I'm kind of pushing, and it's similar to what a lot of other people are pushing, is make this less about tools, make this less about just using Interpreter, which is awesome, and more about having like a tool set that you can mold to do one very specific task. If you do that, every time you do an assessment, your tools will be different, and then you don't have to run into flagging AV or creating static signatures where your team could be identified. On the red team, I would go against the same targets year in and year out. My actions became signatures for the team. Things that I do could be picked up on in future assessments. So in order to avoid that, you really have to kind of be different every time. And this was one of the ways that we were able to do that, and I just adopted it for this. All right, so as discussed in Joe and Chris's talk, which is a great segue, Office macros still work. It's one of the first tricks I was ever taught as a pen tester, is to take a malicious executable and convert it and throw it in a macro. I'm going to do the asynchronous C2, use Tor, use PowerShell for the reasons we talked about, and then implement some randomness. We're also going to use the user agent strings in the proxy settings. There's a lot of people flag on that. So we can actually yank their user agent strings, so it's going to look identical to their web traffic when it's out on the network. And then we're going to do some pseudo-random stuff, so it's not, there's no network signature that you can flag on. So someone asked me on Twitter, because I tend to talk about PowerShell and I blog a lot about PowerShell, why use PowerShell? Who's used PowerShell for pen testing? Awesome. That's a lot more people than I normally see. It's great because it's normally already there. You know, you run into the case like we ran into where, you know, it was all XP boxes and they hadn't installed it. You know, that happens. Maybe they capture the flag. But in reality, we see a lot of Windows 7, or we see PowerShell installed on Windows 7. Yeah. Go ahead.
As a note, you also use it for defense as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
No, it is even better for defense than for offense, for sure. It gives you the ability to do a lot of things that commercial products that you pay a lot of money to do. Absolutely. So it's available to both admins and users. A typical user might not be able to use net commands, like some of the examples Joe and Chris had in their slides. A lot of the environments that I went against, users can't use net commands. They've locked that stuff out. But they haven't figured out that users can use PowerShell to accomplish all the same things. It's much less likely to be locked down than standard command line utilities. And you can rapidly pump out a script to do a specific advanced task really quickly, like this, demonstrate proof of concept persistence in a relatively secure network. And then Matt, another shout out, that's the link to PowerSploit on GitHub. There's a ton of examples of things you can do post-exploitation wise with PowerShell. All right, so the early logic, the pseudo logic. First thing we want to do is, so I'm a pen tester. I'm not a malware author. I don't like when things don't have checks to ensure that they're running in the appropriate environment. So what we're going to do is we're going to check to see what time it is and make sure that it's during the work hours. We're going to grab the user agent strings. We're going to reach out to Twitter and grab what the latest command is, parse out the command, run it, wait a pseudo-random number of seconds or minutes, and then have a kill date, because we're not malware authors. We know that this engagement is going to end. It should clean itself up so that you don't have to go out and clean it off of all their systems. So the first question I got in this discussion was, well, you're not allowed to install anything. So if you think you're going to install Visual Studio, you're crazy. And that's fine, because PowerShell ships with an integrated scripting environment that is really full-featured. And there's some examples of kind of how it looks by default, and you can customize it. In version 3, it's got IntelliSense and a lot of other really nice things that can make prototyping easy, and it means you could sit down, if you're a physical pen tester, if you gain physical access. In one scenario that I've talked about here at Nova Hackers, I was able to come in through the front door, and they had kiosk machines right next to the security guard, and I was able to fire up PowerShell from the kiosk machines and continue doing a pen test essentially internally that way. So the ISE is there. Twitter makes this easy too. This is their version 1 API, which is still enabled, but it returns an XML object. You just pass the username. In this case, it's evil psbot. And it will, which is not suspicious at all.
Does this Twitter account still exist?
Yes, and it's actively being used.
By what?
It's just a proof of concept.
Okay, I got it.
Yeah. So I intend on doing a live demo, and as long as this can touch the internet, hopefully it works out. Where this was the last thing that I tweeted before I drove here, was that command. So you'll get to see, hopefully, how that works. But the point of this slide is that parsing XML with PowerShell is about as easy as it gets. And I'm going to show you that in the next slide. So really, this was the end of the argument as far as I was concerned. This is it. This is everything with it that's heavily commented. This is the proof of concept. You give it a Twitter username. We're going to use .NET to create a web client object. Reach out to Twitter, pump in that username, force it to be XML, and then you go down the tree just as simple as that. The Twitter results.statuses.status.text. That gives us the latest tweet. Now we're just going to pass the latest tweet to cmd.exe. So whatever you were to put in there, it's going to run that command from Twitter without you ever giving up your IP address. So as this scales out, that's pretty cool. You can just put commands in there. But I'm sure the plain text string would flag, so we got to get a little bit more tricky. So let's add some smarter logic. We talked about the kill date, so we're going to go ahead and hard code. And I'm sorry I put so much code in these slides. I kind of do want to talk through so that you see how simple this stuff is. So we're just going to declare what the last date is. Get date is a commandlet, and there's tons of commandlets in PowerShell. So that's going to do a lot of the work for us, which it'll get the current date and time object. It'll create an object from running that. We're going to say, hey, as long as this date hasn't passed, continue. If it has passed, then just kill out. All right, so we need to set work hours. So we'll start the beginning of the workday and the end of the workday. And like I said earlier, I'm not a developer, so I'm sure better ways to do this. I can tell, I think Matt has already come up with a few just looking at it. But this is just simple stuff that I threw together, it worked, and I continued to move on. So this is the actual check that's in invoke TwitterBot, which is the name of the final product, the final proof of concept. All right, this looks crazy. This is a little bit more complicated, and I'm absolutely positive there's a better way to do this. But one of the things that I really don't want to have happen is something like Stuxnet. I did want to put some self-propagation logic, and I wanted to ensure that it didn't get outside of the target organization. So I put this check in so that you would hard code, even though you could easily encode, base64 encode, you could encrypt with a static key, all these strings, but as you'll see, these aren't going to ever sit on disk, per se. You're going to host them up on GitHub. They're going to yank it down directly into memory. So if an analyst is looking at this box, they're not going to see these IP addresses, even if they are sitting in plain text. So all we're doing is there are a couple different methods I put up there of doing it, creating an array of allowed IP addresses, and it's going to just iterate over the array and make sure that wherever it's trying to run is allowed. I had a more complicated way of checking that last thing. What annoys me is a lot of organizations NAT. So then you put their external IPs in here, and then they're running 10 dots, and then it doesn't execute, which I've ran into. So this is going to call out to ifconfig.me, which Matt suggested, and just parse out what its external IP is and check that against the array as well. All right, user agent and proxy settings. We're just gonna grab. Go ahead.
I was going to say, as of super recently, I know prompted this. You can add config.pro.
ifconfig.bro.
Pro.
Oh, pro. Bro would be cooler.
Some companies actually are starting to flag sites like that, like IP checking has been caught with a few things.
I mean, there are very few valid uses of calling out and finding what your external IP is. Yeah. So that would be something, and there's a lot of that. There's no encryption in any of this. There are a lot of ways that you could improve and quiet this down. Go ahead.
They use IP phones, and they connect out, like have remote clients, hit the S10 server, because that should give you what their external IP address
Okay.
is.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
Yeah, that, and then there's also an open DNS, I guess, has a DNS entry that always maps back to, when it maps back, it will resolve to whoever is requesting the, who's ever issuing the DNS request.
Okay.
So it's like whoami.opendns or something. So.
Okay, again, but all of those are potential signatures.
Absolutely,
that could flag. And so you could easily comment that out if that's something you're not interested in, or working on a closed network or whatever. It's very easy. PowerShell treats the registry like a disk, which makes it very easy to parse and make changes to the registry. There's a backtick there under the line, check to see if the proxy is configured. So that's one long line. Backtick is so that it would fit, look a little better on the slide. So we could just check there to see if the proxy is enabled. If it's enabled, it'll be a 1. If it's not, it'll be a 0. So if it is a 1, then let's go ahead and grab the proxy settings and use those with our web client object. And then we can grab the user agent string as well. All right, so this is actually really nifty. I hadn't seen this really documented anywhere. But if you pass essentially an array that you declare on the fly to getRandom, it'll pseudo-randomly return one of those objects. So in this case, we're saying 24 seconds, 29 seconds, 33 seconds, and so on. It's going to randomly grab one of those each time it goes through the forever loop and wait that amount of time. So you could make that array a lot longer, and it would wait a lot longer as well. All right, so now let's start having fun. Now that we got through the boring part. We have to host a script. I would recommend GitHub. I haven't had any problems. I'm already getting some feedback that Pastebin encodes a little differently. So if you want to get around that, you could actually encode the entire script, basically for it, throw it on Pastebin, and that would avoid any of whatever problems they're having with encoding. I would recommend shortening the link, depending on how long it is. Bitly works great. And that's what we're going to do is that first picture right there where it says IEX new object. IEX is an alias, so that's shortening invoke expression. And all that's going to do is download whatever is at the end of that shortened link and execute it in memory. So you host a malicious script out there, you run this line, and it's going to pull it down and execute it.
So that's the part that you actually have to remember.
Yes. So
That's it. That's all.
This is it. So not only that, so this is the 3 steps. You know, you've hosted it up there, so that's the Bitly. The Windows PowerShell window, Lee Holmes tweeted this back in, October? Perfectly honest, I have no idea how this works. I really don't get it. Matt's got a great script that accomplishes the same thing in tons of lines of code. But if you just do cmd whack c echo and then give it a script block, it's going to return some hidden function. It's going to return an encoded and compressed stream. So what we're doing is we're passing that to .split, which is essentially cut in PowerShell, and we're going to take the first, actually the second, 0 being the first in the array, 1 being the second one, and that's going to be our entire script encoded. So we've encoded that line above. So now we're going to bring that to command.exe, which is the obscuresec demo field, and we're just going to say PowerShell exec bypass. So don't follow whatever your execution security policies are. Don't follow that. We're going to bypass them.
Why is there a function that lets you do that? That sounds like
For the hackers, obviously.
Okay, so if you read it, the reason that exists doesn't exist. So it's more that execution policy is not actually for security.
Okay.
And that's really
I can't
all.
be the first person to think about that.
No, it's
like the disabled breaks function.
yes.
Or the netcat option that allows you to grab a shell.
Yeah.
Okay, I understand. But those aren't. But that wasn't developed by Microsoft.
Right. There are legitimate use cases
Okay.
of
Somewhere.
There have been
use
some
cases
before.
doesn't then mean there should be use cases at all.
right. There are companies that are actively using this, and that exact command that's there, just a little bit of tweaking, is how you install the open source Chocolati. I don't know if you've seen that. It's apt-get for Windows. It's actually really cool, but it's built completely in PowerShell by a guy named Rob Reynolds, and that's exactly how it installs. So there are legitimate scenarios that you would want to bypass. You know, if you know you only want to do good stuff, then it's okay. But if you're going to do bad stuff, you don't do it.
So they have their GPO set up to prevent users from using said function. This will be callable if you open up a PowerShell command prompt and dropped in the code block and had it execute?
Yes. So you don't even have to do this.
Well,
To be honest with you, you can just pass the encoded piece, that ENC. So I'm shortening it because it figures out, what you're trying to put in there. You don't actually have to do that exec bypass. If they've set whatever options, which I think only come with PowerShell version 3. Do you know, Matt? GPOs to prevent the bypass of. To my knowledge, you can't.
so there are GPOs to set execution policy changes, but usually they only set it so that you can't specify bypass, but you can say local or user and still get the same execution.
Right. There are probably 10 different ways to do this. If you just start Googling execution security bypass, execution policy bypasses, there are lots of them out there. So when we hit enter on this, that's going to use .NET, call out, pull down the script, and execute it. So macros still work. They're awesome. So what we're going to do is we're going to prepare a payload. We're going to go out and just grab a calendar, just an example I had, and we're going to hide the content. And again, this is one of the first tricks I ever learned as a pen tester, and that was about 5 years ago, just over 5 years ago. And it still is my go-to fallback. And it's kind of what's old is new again, a lot like everything else in InfoSec. With PowerShell, we no longer have to drop an actual binary into an array and then output that to the disk and then call that. We can just do that single command that we've just built and execute it directly. So not only are we starting a new process, so it doesn't matter if they close Excel, we've already got code execution. We haven't written anything to disk, and we're already in memory in our own process.
Hey, Chris,
Yep.
have you seen the in-memory VBS stuff?
Yep, there's also some similar things that make use of, this is kind of a roundabout way to get to what Didier Stevens released several years ago, which does, he injects into the Excel process, right, Matt? Yeah, so this is not doing that. This is just native code execution, but that's it. So even if you look at his actual VBA, it's huge. It's a huge thing. This is not going to add that much space. It is adding a macro, but it's very easy to execute commands with the macro. So we got to get them to enable macros. So if you work for McAfee, I'm sorry. They were just, I Googled for DLP warning, and Google Images, this one, and I've kind of done a play on this for several years. So by saying this document's protected, you've got to run this security thing. They're going to run it. They 9 times out of 10 do, and that's in the demo.
You can also sign the macro.
Yeah, absolutely. You could sign the macro, and if they've disabled macros entirely, most of the time they've only enabled sign macros. All right, so we need to send them the email. In this case, I'm sitting on the client side. I'm sitting internal to their network on a Windows 7 box. So all I did was grab some code from the internet and then trick it to not use authentication. So hard code, don't do authentication, which is very interesting. From inside of people's enterprises, you typically have to authenticate, but you don't have to authenticate as the account that you're sending email as. A few months ago, I tweeted out an MSDN where a Microsoft employee essentially said, if they're already on your enterprise, then it's too late. This doesn't matter. So why do you even care? So this just has an interesting post-exploitation. You get a fish on one person. They may have great settings that don't allow you to spam them or impersonate users. You could then impersonate from inside their network the CEO and send this out that way.
That's because you want their share block to be able to email people that want access to it.
Exactly, or digital senders, or any number of things that have to work internal. Okay, so all we were doing was passing commands. Like it could just be ping in there. We got to come up with a way to give it different functionality. So this is after the fact. I just thought, how do I make this cool? You know, I'm going to talk to people about it, and I really wanted to grab a couple of examples of stuff that Matt and I have done, and some other people, and throw it together so you could really see the true power of PowerShell. So I'm going to delimit with a pipe, which is something a coworker suggested, and one of the custom Trojans that I used to use in a previous job used bang. So it's something I've been used to for a long time. So bang run, that's how you handed it commands. So I stole that. First thing we want to do is get persistence. So I built some maintenance stuff. So bang persist, all it's going to do is use that command, drop that into a LNK file, and then put that in all user startup if it can write to all user startup. If not, it's going to put it in the user startup. So it's just going to be a tiny 2 or 3K link file in the startup. Anytime they log back in,
It's just a link pointing to the script.
it's a link pointing to run. Right, it's going to point to another script,
Got it.
absolutely. So you host the script up, you're going to have to drop the script to disk,
Got it.
and it's going to point and
Well,
execute
naturally
it.
is you would have to persist.
Right, well, I'm going to throw out that
Jesus Christ.
Matt is doing a really cool talk in B-Sides Puerto Rico that hopefully you'll see that you don't have to do this.
Do you think that when we're done with this talk, any of the things that I have built into Fact are going to remain valid after? Because so far you've like invalidated everything that I've ever known about.
I'm sorry about that. No, this is we need help getting this stuff out there, so it'd be great. You know, you grab it, build your own projects, and keep pushing this so that more people realize that not that cryptors aren't important. It's just you really don't have to write to disk or create a binary to get code execution, and I'll demo that in a minute. So bang quit, you just tweet bang quit, and it'll kill all your, as soon as they check in, they'll all just die. Bang sleep puts it to sleep for a specific amount of milliseconds. Bang change, so in this case, I'm giving my botnet to the Justin Bieber Twitter account, which is probably not a good idea. Bang run is the original command that's just going to use CMD and pass parameters to it. Bang download downloads a file to the box. So in that example, which I'm glad I put that example up there because I've had some bugs with it that I just had to work out. That's actually going to use Hack Armory, which is a great site that hosts all kinds of old school binaries out there in different formats for you to be able to grab and pull them down. One of them's Netcat, so that's downloading Netcat to SVC host in temp. But the way that Twitter puts up links, you know, it automatically shortens them. You really got to be careful with that. There's code in there to automatically follow the redirect, but I didn't put code to actually see the site and not be shortened. So if you were to, say, put that pipe right at the end, Twitter is not going to shorten it, so that's not going to work. So one of the first bugs that's already been reported is the download's not working, and that's why. Hopefully I'll get that fixed soon. Bang upload is, I'm playing a game. I'm using, originally I was using filebin.ca, and now I'm using pastebin.ca, which is a really fast and loose pastebin site where the guy has enabled lots of different APIs. He's just trying stuff out. I'm sure he's a cool guy, but as he's figuring out that I'm using them to put up large binaries, I'm taking a binary, splitting it, encoding it, splitting the base 64, and then throwing it up there. I think he's seeing it as abuse, and he's been disabling the API. So I've gone through all of his old APIs, and I think he's disabled them all. So that was not working when I was trying to do a demo. Bang down exec will just download a PowerShell script and execute it directly into memory. Bang screenshot saves a screenshot using all PowerShell to the disk. Bang packet capture. This is probably, in my opinion, one of the coolest things that's in there. In Windows 7, you don't have to install WinPCAP. You don't. You can actually use NetSH to directly create promiscuous full packet captures. So without using any other tools, but what's already on the box, you've got full packet capture, which is something that if you use Meterpreter, has actually flagged on a couple products if you try to do their packet capture. This obviously won't because you're just using what's already there. Bang keylog, I wrote a keylogger specifically for this that I'm going to release on its own as well. So that does keylogging, and it logs the active window title. Thanks to somebody in this room who, during a CCDC practice event, decided he was going to click over here, type some stuff, click over here, type some stuff, move the mouse around. So it's going to track all of that. So if they get creative with that, you can play it back and get exactly how they actually typed it. Bang get system is going to grab all the system token or system privileges. So if you're admin, you can essentially bypass UAC.
Just to clarify very quickly, that keylogger is also entirely PowerShell.
When I say entirely PowerShell, yes, it's in PowerShell, but it's using .NET. So there are different levels of. A lot of people say, well, this is just PowerShell. That's using the commandlets and like the basic scripting interface. A lot of this stuff is fully implementing either C# or .NET. Go ahead, Matt.
Think of PowerShell as a .NET interpreter.
Yes. If you think of PowerShell that way, that's the most powerful way to do it. You're actually doing things that normally would require something to be compiled, and a lot of times it's compiling it on the fly, and other times it's not compiling it at all. It's just running it.
Let me see if I can phrase that question a little better. If you had a stock Windows 7 box,
Yep.
would this work, or would you need .NET Framework and other
Nope.
things?
Stock Windows 7. This works out of the box.
Okay.
.NET comes with it, with PowerShell, with WMF. This is all. This would work. The demo is on a box that I built last night, the pre-recorded one. I just patched it and went to town. I didn't install anything extra.
If you call your Git system, does it lose the user's proxy settings, or do you maintain those?
That's a good question. I don't think that it would lose the proxy settings. Basically, all that's allowing you to do is the next thing you run. So say you wanted to write to something in the registry that required system-level privileges, that next thing would use that. So you're creating like a wrapper for the next thing you're going to do, and then it goes away. Okay, so the script is going to continue to operate. All right, so let's actually start having fun. That's all work stuff.
Oh yeah, that's nothing.
So now let's get into let's get into the stuff that has more like CCDC, more fun type application. So Bang credential, you're going to prompt that window. If they decide to put a username and password in there, it's going to basically reverse the not really encryption that Microsoft is using, and that's pretty well known, and drop it to plain text and whatever file you specify. So Bang credential.
Description window not to say PowerShell?
What's that?
Can you change the description window not to say PowerShell?
That was something Matt pointed out. Yes, you could. You just have to use the API instead of. This is like stupid easy. This is probably, I think it's like 5 lines of code to do this using the PowerShell way.
Say Outlook.
Right, you could make it say Outlook needs to connect. Absolutely. So Bang Elevate will you give it another script, or you give it the URL to where your script is hosted. It's going to download that and then prompt UAC. So if they go ahead and give it UAC, your next instance will then be running
the instance that they downloaded, the script that they downloaded will be run as whatever.
Right, as admin. Yep.
Good thing users never hate that.
Yeah, exactly.
Good thing, right?
Or okay.
All right, so
if you sent elevate again, do you have logic in there to know, hey, I'm already elevated, don't prompt?
Oh yeah, I think it only does it if it's not already elevated. So yes, but what I don't have, you could have multiple instances of this bot running. So if you messed around, you know, you could have 10 on the same machine, and then all of them would be interpreting the latest command, which is why I use global variables. I know which are terrible, but by using a global variable, it keeps kind of state between all of them, so it's not going to run the same command 10 times. Only the first one that calls out, which might not be the elevated one. And I haven't really figured out a way around that yet. So Bang Speak does it will press the volume up until it's all the way up, and then read whatever tweet to them. Bang pop-up, so that's me putting bang pop-up on Twitter, will send them a standard Windows. So you can use that to like preface another attack, the UAC attack. Hey, Outlook couldn't connect. Hit OK, and then right after that, they get the prompts to put their password in. Bang iCar will flag AV. It uses that string, the magic string, to flag all AV products. So you drop it to disk. I've been asked to do that on a pen test before. Hey, can you flag AV on every machine? I don't really see the value of it, but
Oh, it's really valuable.
yeah, it's in there.
Depending on where you put it.
So changing wallpaper, if you've never had to do it, it's something you get asked as a pen tester to do. It's actually a lot harder than it should be.
Yeah.
Programmatically.
So I implemented that. So you give it bang wallpaper, and then you give it on the internet where this image is and where you want to put it to disk. It will download it. That one in particular is like you got owned. That's what's in there. Bang Rickroll, it's cute. It opens up IE and goes to YouTube. So if that's your thing. But I'm really over that. Ever since nation state actors are blasting AC/DC, I mean, we should do that. So this is the Bang Thunderstruck command, which creates a hidden IE com object.
Keyboard is disabled during the song.
So right, you tell it for how long you want this to happen, and essentially, thanks to one of my friends who I asked on Twitter, and he was like, "Yeah, why don't you just hold down the volume key?" So if you hold down volume up repeatedly, they can't get in to do anything. And hopefully I can demo this in a few minutes.
Oh, that's just me.
So during the length of the song, they can't do anything.
They're forced
really.
to rock.
They're forced to rock.
Because this is America.
Unplug the network cable.
It's already running. So it's already downloaded it. So you'll see a little pause while it's downloading the whole thing. There's a little gotcha with YouTube because they started pushing out advertisements. So like every third time you try to listen to Thunderstruck, you get an ad first in full volume. I'm really hoping that doesn't happen.
Maybe you'll get one of those like 7-minute ads. That they're like for a movie that just goes on and on and on. You can't skip it. Viagra.
Right. All right. So Dave Kennedy, props to him. Matt and I saw his talk at DEF CON 18, he and Josh Kelly, and I think they had another person as well. And that kind of got us down this road of we really need to learn PowerShell. And one of the things he implemented and released there was a primitive bind shell, which works still to this day works really well. So I took his logic, cleaned it up a little bit. So if you do bang bind and give it a port, it'll open up. It'll actually, if it can, it'll open if the firewall is enabled, it will open the port first in a way that's not going to prompt the user if they have the ability to. If not, then it'll prompt the user to open the port.
Bind on IPv6.
That's not going to bind on IPv6 by default. Yeah, it probably could though.
Yeah, very wrong.
And this I think is probably the most useful thing if you're a pen tester. This has been out. I don't know, Matt, when did you release this? Before Shmoocon last year, right?
It was like a year.
Okay, so this is going to do. It's going to take the standard stub for interpreter HTTPS, and it's going to inject it in memory without having to drop a disk. So you bang shell, you type that, and then you have interpreter. You've not had to create a binary. All the logic is built in. It's as simple as passing it 2 parameters and force. So you give it the IP, the port that you're calling back to, stand up a handler, and give it force. So let's see what that looks like.
Click save.
All right, so you got the email delivered. This is the macro that we built. So the user's opening up his email at this point. You know, we baited the hook like has been talked about a million times. So IRS code has changed. Oh crap! People worry about their pay. You get an extra enable editing, so they've got to click that. Then they got to click enable content, and then bam, they get their material, and they're like, "This is boring. Like, this doesn't matter to me." And they close out, which would traditionally kill some of the other VB methods. So they close everything out, and they're like, "Oh, forget this. I'm out of here. Lock my workstation." So what do we see on our end? It's now running. It's in its wait cycle, so it hasn't got to the point for this demo. I tried to lower the wait value, but it ended up being about a minute. So now we're going to set up a reverse HTTPS. This is literally all we're having to do is tweet out the command, sit there, wait for it to pull down that command, and when it does, yep, I think I put still waiting. Still waiting. Again, you would probably want this to be a much longer interval than 20-something, 30 seconds, a minute. So it's the script is running in the background. Oh, there it goes. Yay! So even though I talk about PowerShell, if you want to get to interpreter, you could very easily. And that's just running get UID. Again, that was the Win7 box that I just built for the demo and installed the latest updates and went to town. I did install Office as well, but we've got full-blown interpreter without dropping anything to disk and all in memory, essentially through a macro. The macro itself, the whole code is out on my GitHub if that's something that would interest you as a tester. I don't know how this is going to work, to be honest with you. The last demo this is essentially a backdoor. I didn't want to run it on someone else's machine, so I created one that neuters all the malicious functions and it only implemented the Thunderstruck one. So let's see how that how this goes down. Sweet, it went straight to. All right.
That's a fully patched version of Office, by the way.
Yeah, it should be.
Also on mute.
That's cool.
It won't be anymore.
Yeah, hopefully.
Oh,
there it goes.
Volume all the way up.
It unmuted the machine.
So it unmuted the machine. Right now, there's you can't. The keyboard is going to be unresponsive at best, and of course, it's an advertisement.
This is awesome ACDC.
Yeah. So instead, yeah, 1 or 3
I
changes.
have important news. I will be announcing this year's Bonnaroo lineup live on YouTube.
So free advertisement.
You notice that there's no IE running.
And I'm led to believe
Where
it's
is
going
Right.
to be awesome.
It all starts at noon Eastern on February 19th with classic
I would
Bonnaroo
show you what the
performances
keyboard's
from Tom
trying to
Petty
say,
and the
but,
Heartbreakers. Johnny Bear, Twice Thrice, and more. Plus a sneak peek at upcoming
Okay,
Bonnaroo
sweet.
365 series. Then at 1 p.m. it's Blam.
There's nothing in there.
The
But
Bonnaroo lineup announcement
if you
megathon
go-
hosted by Weird Al. And finally at 2 p.m.
Wow, it's not.
a classic full performance from Bonnaroo. Subscribe to
Yeah.
Bonnaroo 365 and don't miss Blam.
Look at all that memory. Can you add it in there?
Wow, this is a long advertisement. Yeah, you could right click at this point and
No,
process.
you can't do that. The song.
Oh, it restarted.
It restarted.